Rain on metal, engines humming, and then silence. 4 minutes, that's all it took for one airliner to fall 38,000 feet, according to France's BEA final report on Air France 447, 2012. 4 minutes, and an ocean kept its secret. One storm, broad-shouldered, unblinking, was enough to erase a cargo giant larger than the Titanic, as recorded by the UK reopened formal investigation into MV Darbisher 2000 and Lloyd's register tonnage figures, a ship measured in football fields, gone in a night sea. And one cryptic radio line on the 157-337 logged by the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca on July 2, 1937, would leave generations arguing which way a legendary pilot turned in her final hour. Tonight, we follow 6 journeys, 6 puzzles, and 6 cold lessons about people, machines, and the unruly forces that bind them. On screen, storms drift over the intertropical convergence zone. A map flashes, Howland to Nicomaroro, the South Pacific, the Andes, Bermuda, the Philippine Sea, the Mid-Atlantic, and then back to us. This is a story where science wrestles legend, operations confront speculation, and evidence speaks into radio silence. Our first stop, the world's most famous missing aviator, Amelia Earhart, the woman who dared to circle the globe and never came back. We must be on you, but we cannot see you. Fuel is running low. Those were the final words of Amelia Earhart, transmitted to the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca on July 7, 1937, and logged in its official communication records that morning. And then, nothing. No signal, no wreckage, no goodbye. But before the silence, there was the legend. Earhart was more than a pilot. She was a revolution in leather and steel. In 1928, she became the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean, albeit as a passenger. 4 years later, in 1932, she did it again, but this time alone, flying from Newfoundland to Ireland in about 15 hours. According to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, that flight made her the first woman and only the second person after Charles Lindbergh to complete a solo transatlantic journey. She broke record after record. A non-stop flight from Los Angeles to Newark without refueling. The first woman to fly coast to coast across the United States without stopping. And through every success came brushes with danger, fuel leaks, frozen wings, an engine's collector ring cracked and spitting fire. She didn't panic. She adjusted, calculated, survived. That calm under pressure would later define every theory about what happened to her. By 1937, Earhart was chasing her boldest dream yet, a flight around the world along the equator, roughly 29,000 miles, planned for 40 days. Her aircraft, the Lockheed Model 10E Electra, had been heavily modified for the mission, according to Lockheed's own engineering specifications. It carried more than 1,000 pounds of fuel, 5 times the standard load, to give her range across the Pacific's long stretches of open water. But the final leg, from Lae, New Guinea, to a pinpoint on the map called Howland Island, that was where everything went wrong. Reports from radio operator Harry Balfour in Lae noted stronger than expected headwinds, warnings sent 3 times but never confirmed. The winds would have slowed her progress and burned fuel faster. Later, her last altitude report at 7,000 feet was followed by a climb to 10,000. Aviation historian Elgin Long later suggested she may have ascended to avoid thick cloud cover, but that decision came at a steep price in fuel. As dawn broke over the Pacific, Itasca began hearing her signal grow stronger, proof she was near. Then came that haunting line, "We must be on you, but we cannot see you." She added one last clue, the coordinates on the line 157 to 3237, a navigator's shorthand for the directional line she was flying. It meant she was sweeping north and south, searching blindly for a speck of land that should have been right below her. When the radio went dead, the search began. The Itasca scoured the northwest of Howland. The battleship Colorado combed the southeast. Even the aircraft carrier Lexington joined the hunt. By mid-July 1937, after covering hundreds of thousands of square miles, the Pacific remained empty. No plane, no bodies. And so the theories began. The first and simplest was fuel exhaustion. This is one of the most generally accepted versions of the famous aviator's disappearance. Many experts believe Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan got slightly off course on a route to a refueling stop at Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean. Earhart radioed U.S. Coast Guard ships stationed in the area, reporting that neither she nor Noonan could spot the tiny island where they were supposed to land. According to the so-called crash and sink theory, the plane eventually ran out of gas and plunged into the ocean, killing both Earhart and Noonan. It then sank, leaving no sign of their whereabouts. Then came the romantic theory. Nikumaroro, once known as Gardner Island, some 350 nautical miles to the south. The line 157-337 passed directly over it. In 1939, British officer Gerald Gallagher reported finding a makeshift campsite, a sextant box, and partial human bones. The bones were examined by Dr. D.W. Hoodless, who concluded they belonged to a European male and then discarded them. Decades later, forensic researchers at Tegar reanalyzed the old measurements and argued they matched a tall European female, possibly Earhart. But without the bones, there could be no DNA test. Add to that scattered reports of faint distress calls heard on shortwave radios, some recorded by an American teenager named Betty Klenk, and you have an intriguing but fractured narrative. Others drifted toward darker tales, captured by the Japanese in the Marshall Islands, executed or secretly repatriated under a new identity as Irene Bolam. None of it withstood scrutiny. The distances exceeded her range. The famous dockside photo, supposedly proving the theory, was later traced to a 1935 Japanese travel book 2 years before she vanished. And finally, the most far-fetched, abduction by extraterrestrials. Even the investigators joked that this one belonged more to Star Trek than to the Pacific Archives. In the end, all the evidence, winds, fuel, altitude, and those final words, points to the simplest explanation. Occam's razor, as scientists say. The answer, requiring the fewest assumptions, is usually the right one. Amelia Earhart likely ran out of fuel, descending unseen into the vast, indifferent sea near Howland Island. But the ocean doesn't return what it takes easily, and it would not be the last time a vessel vanished without a trace. Next, the haunting mystery of the Ghost Ship Joyita. A ship still afloat, but 25 souls gone. On November 10, 1955, the trading vessel MV Joyita was spotted drifting in the South Pacific by Captain Gerald Douglas of the Tuvalu. The boat leaned heavily to port, its decks weathered and sun-bleached, the canvas awning sagging as if it had spent weeks alone under the tropical sun. Inside, the scene was eerie, like life had simply paused. According to the official inspection records from Suva, Fiji, the ship's clocks had stopped at 10:25. The light switches were frozen in the on position. A medical bag lay open with bloody bandages still inside. The radio was tuned precisely to the international distress frequency, 2182 kilohertz. But no call had ever been received. There were no navigation tools. The logbook, sextant, compass, and even the captain's revolver, all missing. And the lifeboats? Gone. 4 small craft, barely enough for the crew and passengers, simply vanished into the blue. What made the discovery so haunting wasn't just that Joyita was empty. It was that she was still afloat. Her story had always carried a trace of drama. Built in 1931 for Hollywood film director Roland West, the ship was named Joyita, meaning Little Jewel, after his wife, actress Jewel Carmen. When actress Thelma Todd was found dead in 1935 under suspicious circumstances, tabloid rumors linked the yacht to foul play, though no evidence ever surfaced. During World War II, the U.S. Navy used the vessel for patrol duty before she returned to civilian hands. By 1955, she was leased by Captain Thomas Dusty Miller to carry 16 crew and 9 passengers from Samoa to the Tokelau Islands, a short voyage of about 270 miles. But Miller made a fateful decision. He left port with only one of Joyita's 2 engines working. The second was under repair. Weather reports were fair, so he pressed on. 5 days later, the ship vanished from radio contact. The Royal New Zealand Air Force searched 300,000 square kilometers of ocean. Nothing. A month later, the Tuvalu found her drifting, alone. When the ship was towed to Suva for inspection, investigators found the hull still sound, but the mechanical trail told a grim story. According to the Marine Court of Inquiry in Fiji, the cooling pipes in the engine room were corroded and cracked, allowing seawater to flood the bilge. The main bilge pump was clogged and useless. A makeshift auxiliary pump had been rigged, showing someone tried desperately to keep the ship alive. On the starboard engine, crew had stacked thick cushions, probably to shield against splashing seawater. The antenna wire for the radio had snapped and been painted over during a refit, cutting its range to roughly 3 kilometers. In other words, Joyita could have been calling for help all along. No one was close enough to hear. She wasn't a cursed ship. She was a trapped one, suffering a chain reaction of failures that isolated everyone aboard. But the mystery deepened. Why did they abandon a vessel that, by design, was almost unsinkable? Her hull was lined with cork and empty fuel drums for buoyancy. Captain Miller knew she would stay afloat even if half submerged. Some believed Miller was injured, his blood perhaps among the medical supplies, and with his leadership gone, panic took hold. Others point to tension between Miller and his first mate, Chuck Simpson, who had previously refused to sail under him, but joined this trip anyway. If command collapsed amid flooding, darkness, and silence, the crew could have made a desperate choice, taking to the small boats, believing the Joyita was doomed. There were even rumors of piracy or a Japanese attack, fueled by a rusty knife stamped "Made in Japan." But the ship's cargo, flour, sugar, and copra, hardly attracted thieves, and no damage or theft was ever proven. The simplest answer is the hardest to accept. Under pressure, exhausted and cut off, they abandoned safety for the illusion of escape. In maritime survival, it's the cardinal sin: never leave a floating ship. So Joyita was no ghost, no curse. She was a textbook collapse of machinery and morale, a tragedy born not from mystery, but from human fear. But not all disappearances come from panic. Some are born from the thin air itself. Next, a story of flight, technology, and a so-called curse in the sky, the doomed planes of the British South American Airways. One airline, 3 planes, all vanished. Was it a curse or simply the weather playing God? In the years right after World War II, British aviation was rebuilding from the ashes. The British South American Airways, known as BSAA, was born in 1944 to reconnect Britain with its trade routes across the Atlantic. But this was a new kind of airline, flying long, lonely ocean routes with aircraft that were, in truth, war machines repainted for peace. The fleet relied on converted bombers, the Avro Lancastrian and the Avro Tudor, both designed from military predecessors, the Lancaster and Lincoln. These aircraft were fast and sturdy, but they were never meant for 10-hour ocean crossings where radio contact faded and celestial navigation was the only backup. Their routes, London to South America and later across the Caribbean, stretched every piece of technology to its limit. The first to vanish was the Stardust, August 2nd, 1947. The Avro Lancastrian, tail number GAGWH, was on its final leg from Buenos Aires to Santiago, Chile. 11 people on board, 6 passengers, 5 crew. At 5:45 p.m., the pilot radioed that he was descending toward Santiago, and then silence. Search teams scoured the Andes for days but found nothing. For half a century, Stardust remained a myth until 1998, when climbers in Argentina's Tupungato Glacier discovered twisted aluminum emerging from the ice. Investigators confirmed the wreckage: Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, landing gear, even mailbags preserved by the cold. When forensic teams reconstructed the event in 2000, the cause became clear. A powerful jet stream, one of the first ever recorded in that region, had created a strong headwind at 24,000 feet. Believing they had cleared the Andes, the pilots descended too early and flew directly into a mountainside. Controlled flight into terrain, hidden by cloud and by the limits of 1940s meteorology. The second disappearance struck less than a year later. January 30th, 1948, the Star Tiger, an Avro Tudor 4 with 31 people aboard, vanished on its way from the Azores to Bermuda. Weather reports from the time, preserved by the UK Air Ministry, show heavy winds and low visibility. To avoid turbulence, the captain flew unusually low, around 2,000 feet above the Atlantic. In the darkness, with no horizon and little instrumentation, even small navigation errors became fatal. A companion aircraft, a Lancastrian scout plane flying ahead, later reported the winds were pushing as much as 60 nautical miles off course. The Star Tiger never arrived. 5 days of search operations turned up only empty barrels and fragments of wood adrift 325 miles northwest of Bermuda. And then, the final blow. January 17, 1949, the Star Ariel, another Tudor 4, departed Bermuda for Kingston, Jamaica, under perfect blue skies. Radio logs show routine communication until 9:42 a.m., and then nothing, no mayday. No wreckage, nothing. This time, investigators couldn't blame weather. The day was clear, but atmospheric radio skip, a known issue in tropical latitudes, had caused bursts of static and blackouts that morning. The crew had switched their frequency to Kingston too early, placing themselves beyond the range of both control stations. Any distress call would have gone unheard. 3 disappearances in less than 2 years, all within the same region, all on similar aircraft. It didn't take long for the press to give the phenomenon a name: the Bermuda Triangle. Writers filled the void of data with fantasy: aliens, time warps, magnetic anomalies. But experts at the UK Civil Aviation Authority later found a more grounded pattern. Each loss followed a chain of very human factors: weather misjudgment, outdated equipment, poor communication procedures. Nothing supernatural, just aviation still learning how to survive the jet stream era. The toll on BSAA, though, was devastating. After the Star Tiger and Star Ariel vanished, the airline grounded its Tudor fleet for inspections. Operations froze, profits collapsed, and within a year, BSAA was absorbed into BOAC, the national carrier. The name disappeared, just like its planes. When evidence finally surfaced, the myth unraveled. The so-called curse of the sky turned out to be nothing more than wind, unseen, powerful, and perfectly ordinary. But not every disappearance could be explained away so neatly. Because in 1957, over the vast Pacific, a luxurious Pan Am flight vanished in daylight, and what came next looked less like bad luck and more like a cover-up. They called it the romance of the skies. Pan American World Airways' most glamorous route, San Francisco to Honolulu, aboard the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, a double-decked symbol of post-war luxury. Cocktails on the upper lounge, a spiral staircase, white-gloved service. It was, by every measure, the height of 1950s confidence in flight. And then, it simply disappeared. November 8, 1957, Flight 7, tail number N90944, departed at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time with 36 passengers and 8 crew. The weather was clear, no storms on radar. Through the first hours, everything went according to procedure. Each position report to Ocean Station November, a U.S. weather ship anchored mid-Pacific, arrived right on schedule. At 01:04 GMT, the radio went silent. No mayday, no sign of distress, nothing. And in perfect weather, That silence made no sense. The U.S. Coast Guard launched one of the largest air-sea searches of its time. According to the official Civil Aeronautics Board investigation, file number 1 Brown 257, 30 aircraft and 14 ships combed 150,000 square miles of ocean. The aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea joined in. But almost from the start, odd things happened. A weak SOS signal was heard on the Gibson Girl rescue frequency, the same channel used by Pan Am's survival radios. The call contained the digits 9444, matching the last 4 numbers of the plane's registration. Hours later, other pilots reported red flares and a patch of yellow dye on the water, both standard distress markers. But those too were written off as testing exercises. 3 days into the search, the ocean began giving pieces back. First a seat cushion, then debris, and finally, bodies. Their wristwatches had all stopped at 5:27 p.m. About 23 minutes after the last known transmission. So what had really happened in those missing 23 minutes? When the Civil Aeronautics Board finally issued its report in 1958, the findings were uneasy. According to internal memos later cited by journalist Ken Fortenberry, Pan Am executives met privately with CAB investigators before the final draft. The board, tasked both with regulating and investigating airlines, had an obvious conflict of interest. In public, the company's prestige was preserved. In private, many suspected a cover-up. As years passed, darker theories emerged. One focused on the purser, Eugene Crosswaite. Police and Pan Am personnel records describe him as unstable, grieving the recent death of his wife and showing signs of suicidal depression. He'd once bragged to family about possessing blasting powder. On the morning of the flight, he revised his will, removing his stepchildren, and locked it in his car before reporting for duty. Then, decades later, a new voice surfaced. In 2014, Fortenberry, whose father had been the flight's navigator, obtained a long-lost transcript of an emergency transmission that had been quietly logged, then sealed, by search operators in 1957. The voice, barely audible, said, "Number on fire. Tail is missing. Fuel control. Coordinate. Engine 3. The message lasted less than 30 seconds. The timestamp placed it 7.5 minutes after the last known contact, meaning the crew was alive, fighting to stay airborne. The phrases matched the evidence: fire, carbon monoxide, and an attempt to ditch. It also proved something the official record had never admitted. The authorities had heard a distress call. They just buried it. In the end, Romance of the Skies wasn't just an air disaster. It was a story of silence. Silence on the radio, silence in the archives, and silence from those who chose reputation over truth. But sometimes, truth does rise from the deep if people refuse to stop looking. Next, the story of a ship even larger than the Titanic and the families who forced a nation to face what really sank it, the tragedy of the MV Darbisher. It was larger than the Titanic, and it vanished without a single cry for help. On September 9, 1980, the MV Darbisher, a British bulk carrier belonging to Bibby Line, was finishing an 8-week voyage from Canada to Japan with a cargo of 150,000 tons of iron ore. As the vessel crossed the South China Sea, a powerful typhoon, named Orchid by the Japan Meteorological Agency, was sweeping in from the east. Captain Jeffrey Underhill, 47 years old and a veteran of the North Atlantic, adjusted course, slowed speed, and turned the bow about 40 degrees into the waves, exactly as the textbook advised. The ship kept sending routine position reports, and then silence. No mayday, no distress signal. 6 days passed before anyone even reported the Darbisher overdue. The company assumed a radio outage. By the time the alarm was raised on September 15th, the typhoon had already passed, and the Darbisher had disappeared, along with all 42 crew. The British government's first inquiry was swift and shallow. Its conclusion, published in 1981, was almost casual. The vessel succumbed to the forces of Typhoon Orchid. No structural fault, no deeper look, case closed. But to the families left behind, That explanation felt too easy. The Darbisher wasn't an old rust bucket. She was part of a new generation of bridge-class carriers, nearly 1,000 feet long, built in the 1970s at Swan Hunter shipyards in the UK. These were OBO ships, or bulk oil, designed to carry different cargo types without sailing empty. Efficiency was everything, but in the fierce competition of the late 1970s, Britain's shipyards were struggling against Japanese and Korean builders. Corners were cut, designs tweaked to save time and money. Small flaws hid inside enormous steel hulls. In 1982, another bridge-class ship, the MV Darbisher, suffered a massive hull fracture during heavy weather. Others reported similar damage. Every one of them was quietly repaired and sent back to sea. Only the Darbisher, the youngest of the class, was gone. Ridyard's findings were dismissed. Then, in 1986, fate proved him right. The MV Kowloon Bridge, another ship from the same design series, broke in half off the coast of Ireland. This time, it happened in full view of television cameras. The images forced the government to act. A new public inquiry opened in 1988, but the result was the same old refrain. Officials declared no evidence of design failure, loss due to extreme weather. Families called it a whitewash. Still, they refused to stop. By 1994, after years of pressure, the International Transport Workers Federation agreed to fund a private expedition to find the wreck. Using deep-sea sonar, the search team located the Darbisher in just 23 hours, resting nearly 4,000 meters below the surface south of Japan. When forensic experts studied the footage, later published by the UK Reopened Formal Investigation Report 2000, the truth finally surfaced. The ship had not been torn apart by wind or wave. The bow hatches, designed to seal the forward cargo holds, had failed under the hammer of the storm. Water flooded one compartment, then the next, triggering a domino collapse of the internal bulkheads. As the front of the vessel filled, the sheer weight pulled the bow under until the entire structure snapped and sank. Two other ships nearby survived the same typhoon, proof that design, not destiny, was to blame. The impact of that discovery rippled through the maritime world. New global standards for hatch cover strength were introduced. Inspection protocols became stricter. And perhaps most important of all, accident investigations were required to involve the families of those lost, to make sure their voices could never again be ignored. It turned out the Darbisher wasn't buried by conspiracy, but by indifference. Yet even as the seas revealed one truth, the skies were waiting with another. Because just a few decades later, a modern jetliner would vanish over the Atlantic, and the black box would tell a story far more human than mechanical. 4 minutes. That's how long it took for a modern airliner to fall 38,000 feet, about the time it takes to toast a slice of bread. It was June 1st, 2009. Air France Flight 447, an Airbus A330, was flying overnight from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. 3 pilots were on board, as required for long-haul routes. Captain Marc Dubois, 58 years old, with more than 11,000 flight hours. First Officer David Robert, 37, and relief pilot Pierre-Cédric Bonin, 32. But it was the dead of night, deep over the Atlantic, crossing the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a stretch infamous for massive thunderstorms and violent updrafts. At 2:10 a.m. UTC, the plane reached a line of towering storm clouds. Ice crystals, supercooled but invisible on radar, began coating the Pitot probes. Suddenly, the sensors froze. The flight computers received impossible readings, airspeed plunging from 275 knots to barely 60. Following Airbus protocol, the autopilot and autothrust systems instantly disengaged. The aircraft reverted to alternate law, a manual control mode that removes its automatic stall protections. Inside the cockpit, warning tones erupted. 10 separate ECAM alerts in just seconds. Startled by the chaos, the relief pilot pulled back on the side stick, trying to maintain altitude. The nose rose sharply. The plane began to climb. But at that height, over 35,000 feet, the air was thin. The the margin between lift and stall razor thin. The jet reached 38,000 feet, its coffin corner. Then it began to shudder. For the next 4 minutes, everything happened in confusion. The aircraft entered a full aerodynamic stall, wings buffeting, nose pitched high. Yet the cockpit voice recorder later revealed that none of the 3 pilots realized they were stalled. The stall warning horn sounded continuously, but it stopped whenever the sensors registered 0 airspeed, making the crew believe they were descending too fast, not stalling. Both pilots applied opposite commands, triggering dual input alerts as their side sticks canceled each other out. The captain returned to the cockpit at 2:11, but by then, the jet was falling at more than 10,000 feet per minute. The last recorded words came at 2:14 a.m. "But what's happening?" the ocean answered in silence. It took search teams 2 years to find the wreckage, located by the BEA at a depth of 12,800 feet, scattered across the mid-Atlantic ridge. When investigators finally recovered the black boxes in May 2011, they found both recorders perfectly intact. The data told a story not of technology failing, but of humans overwhelmed by it. The pitot tubes froze only for about 1 minute, yet the resulting confusion and lack of high-altitude stall training turned a manageable situation into a fatal one. The Air France 447 disaster reshaped aviation safety worldwide. Regulators introduced mandatory upset prevention and recovery training, UPRT, ensuring every pilot learns to recognize and recover from a stall at high altitude. Airbus redesigned its pitot probes, improved stall warning logic, and urged the installation of cockpit cameras. Search and rescue procedures and black box locator beacons were upgraded across the industry. In the end, the loss of 228 lives forced the aviation world to face an uncomfortable truth. Progress is never just about better machines, it's about wiser humans. So, don't let technology make us forget the art of flying. From a pilot's final words over a dark ocean to a ship that drifted empty across the Pacific, every mystery leaves behind one echo: the cost of not listening soon enough. When you line up the facts, the weather, the machinery, and the human choices, the so-called curses begin to fade. A single radio line on 157 of the 337, a snapped antenna painted over, an unseen jet stream, a hatch that failed, a frozen pitot tube. Tiny details. Each one changes the course of lives and rewrites history. From the families of the Darbisher to the sons and daughters of Pan Am Flight 7, justice was delayed but never buried. The ocean may hide its secrets, yet persistence still pulls truth from the deep. So what do you think? Were these tragedies simply accidents of nature, or reminders of how fragile our systems truly are? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the next deep dive into the mysteries that still wait beneath the surface.